We know that many children and adolescents think and learn differently, which is why it is so important that we discuss the different ways to support them. Last week, we spoke with Leah Hiller about occupational therapy, and today my guest is Rachel Kapp. Rachel Kapp was a lead preschool teacher, a tutor in private practice, and she is now a sought-after educational therapist and co-host of the Learn Smarter podcast. Today, she will discuss educational therapy and how it helps struggling learners.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Hi, Rachel. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, Karen. Thanks for asking me to join in this. I'm so proud of you that you're doing a podcast and you sound so good on air. I can listen to your voice always.
Thank you. I'm learning from you.
Thanks. And you were a fabulous guest on our podcast, too. That's a very popular episode.
Well, I have to tell you, I think that was the first podcast that I'd been on as a guest. And I think that started the wheels turning in terms of, this might be something that I want to do in terms of, again, expanding Child Nexus's mission of getting information out there to people. So thank you.
You're welcome. I totally understand, because if you have never recorded a podcast, it can seem like a lot, but this is so fun. It's just having conversations with people.
It's so much fun. It's like having coffee.
Yes. I haven't seen you during the pandemic, but this is nice to have the opportunity to catch up because our missions so align.
They really do. They really do. When I listen to your podcast and I know about the work that you do, we have the same mission of helping kids who are struggling, and we do it in different ways, but the outcome we want is exactly the same.
Yep. And we want people to know about it.
Yes, absolutely. Which is why I had you on today. So as you know, I brought you on the podcast to discuss educational therapy. I do evaluations of kids who are struggling. And oftentimes when in the process of that assessment, I'm identifying learning issues, neurodevelopmental disorders, and kids need support after they leave my office and after the evaluation is complete. And oftentimes I'm referring them to people like you who do educational therapy. For some parents, when I'm recommending educational therapy, they're hearing that term for the first time. They have no idea what educational therapy is. So I said, last week we had Leah Hiller on and she was describing occupational therapy. And I said, I need to talk to Rachel Kapp. I need to have her on the podcast to discuss educational therapy. So can we just start by defining what it is?
Yes.
For people who don't know.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity, because this is deeply part of my mission, is to expand awareness about what it is that I do, because it is not a term that parents know, and unless they have a friend who has used an educational therapist. But for the most part, parents don't know. So what's fun about educational therapy is that every ed therapist sort of defines it a little differently. But my definition is, as an educational therapist, I work one-on-one with students with different learning profiles to help provide skills and strategies that guide them towards becoming independent and autonomous learners in the classroom and in life. Part of my mission is to also reignite that love of learning that I firmly believe it's a fundamental core value that all kids like to learn and also all kids like to please. So when they're not meeting expectations and they're not enjoying learning anymore, it's my job as the ed therapist to get curious and to help them sort of bridge that gap so that they can feel secure in who they are and that they're able to explain it to other people as well.
Yeah. And I think that independence is such a big piece because, I meet with families and they've been providing so much support to their struggling learners. And the goal, like you're saying, is independence, right? It's autonomy, but they have to get there. There's a process in order to get them there. And that's kind of where you come in to kind of fill that gap. And then also that piece about the love of learning. For so many kids that we work with, there's been a significant struggle over an extended period of time for so many kids. And that has just taken a toll on so many kids where many of them just have given up, or they just don't feel like putting forth the effort to persist with learning because it's been so hard. How do you help kids work through that?
Yeah. So it's a good point. And it's something that especially the older kids are coming into educational therapy, frankly, with a lot of baggage. And there's been a lot of conversation in their home about their failure to perform. And they get the message a lot that they're not trying hard enough. And what I always say is like, you just haven't been given the right tweaks here to access the curriculum. So we have to first start by honoring the experience that they've had. Good educational therapy should result in better family home life. It just should. The conversation should, over the course of the journey of educational therapy, and you're absolutely right, the point of ed therapy is to be done with ed therapy. It's the happiest day for me when we get to graduate a client out. And it's also personally sad because we're bonded, but it's the point is to graduate kids out. So the first step is sort of honoring the journey that they've been on. And parents have oftentimes invested a lot in tutors, content area tutors. And by the time they've come to somebody like you, they have been on a journey of understanding that something is atypical or they want to explore something more. They've been questioning something usually for a long time. And so they've already been on quite the journey by the time they come to me. And what they ask is like, what's going to make you different? Like they'll say, Rachel, we've invested a lot over the years. And I'll say, this should be your last stop. As educational therapists, we are highly trained. Most of us have master's degrees in special education, and we're looking at the whole child. We're looking at the whole experience that they are having in the classroom. And oftentimes the benefit of our experience is that we can help them build relationships or use our relationships to sort of have the school have a different level of understanding about them, teach the kids themselves how to express their own learning profile, and have that sort of metacognitive conversation with them so that, it's awesome when one of the learners in my practice will come in and say, okay, Rachel, I have this, and I know it's going to be hard for me because of X, Y, and Z. So what do we do? And getting to that point, it's a process. I co-host Learn Smarter, the educational therapy podcast with a fellow ed therapist, Stephanie Pitts in the South Bay. And we have together come up with sort of the framework, the process that students go through in each of our practices. Is it okay if I briefly describe that?
I'd love you to.
Okay. And you can also go back and listen to my podcast too, and go and listen to the framework episode, which of course I didn't write down ahead of this.
But I will put in the show. I will
send it. Okay. So we sort of call it the ABCs of educational therapy. So the first phase is really 4 to 6 sessions, and everything. Grant us grace and grant us fluidity on this because it's a fluid process. But the first phase is really an assessment period. All the assessments that's happening in either one of our practices is all informal because you've done all the formal testing usually. And so we kind of gather up all that information. We take what you're saying, we take what the parents are telling us is going on at that particular moment. And then we also incorporate what the student and the teacher is saying. And so we're kind of information gathering. And also it's really critical during that period of time to build rapport with the student. I work a lot with students with ADHD. And oftentimes during that first session, they're kind of just telling me about their experience in school. And I'm sitting there nodding. I'm like, yeah, this is what's going on. This is why that's happening. Like, this is what we're going to do about it. And I'm kind of just normalizing their experience. And it's oftentimes the first time that people aren't judging what's happening and are understanding, and then reflecting back to them why it's been happening to them and that there's hope too. So then the second phase of educational therapy is the building process. That's where we build skills and strategies. That's where we are overhauling systems. I really believe that's a really important, critical piece, especially in virtual learning. Making sure that kids know how to manage themselves digitally, how to manage themselves physically. I always say I want all my clients to show up on time, knowing where they have to go and having what they need once they get there. And it's about building systems in so they can do that. And then teaching them in the final part of educational therapy, competency. And in the competency phase, I know that competency is sort of taking place because sessions get quiet. They get very student directed. I become much more of like a backup. They're already doing all the things and they're self-selecting the appropriate strategies in the appropriate moment for the appropriate task. And that's when I get to go and have the conversation with parents. Hey, it's time for me to step back and let them step forward. No parent wants to. They all want to keep the status quo because it's working and home life has improved. And, but that means my job is done. And it's not to say that you can't email me. And because I have clients too. Sometimes I have a client who like every 6 months, he'll just text me what strategies he's still using and just checking. I'm always around. But the point is to let these kids go off and fly, and parents are scared. And because sometimes it can feel like 3 steps forward, 1 step back, but they're ready. So that's sort of the process that students go through, at least in my practice. And I have great insight into Steph's practice as well. So that's kind of the process.
And that process really builds self-competence and self-esteem because they take ownership of the learning. And, you know, we're in this kind of culture of grades and assessment. And by getting to that level of competence, that's kind of like a built-in evaluation that indicates to you that those students have benefited from the educational therapy that they've been doing with you.
Yeah, it means it worked. It means job well done and that we went in the right direction. And sometimes educational therapy can feel like throwing spaghetti at the wall because one strategy may work for really well for one student, but it's really not the best fit for another. So it's one of the reasons I love my job is because I have to get creative. And with the learners that we work with, sometimes they push back. Sometimes we have kids who walk in the door who are absolutely not open to this. And so we really have to sort of, and those kids that need a little extra love, those are the ones that, you know, it's all the more gratifying when we sort of stick with them through it.
Right. And that really speaks to kind of the work you do being individualized and really looking at the whole child, the whole learner, as opposed to that area of struggle. Because that's how you want to support them kind of moving forward so that at the end, when they've reached that competency level, they can also self-advocate for what it is that they need moving forward. And even if that means giving you a call and saying, hey, you know, I've been doing great, but now I'm kind of coming up against something that's causing difficulty for me. I'd love to kind of work with you again.
And another really critical piece that the longer I do this, the more important I think it has become for me is the parent coaching component of what we do. Because as educational therapists, we sort of act as a case manager. So oftentimes we have relationships with whoever is appropriate to have relationship with at the school, whether it's a learning support team or particular content areas teacher or whatever, or if they're in elementary school, their classroom teacher. But the parent coaching piece has become really, really important in the work that we do because so often these kids come into my practice feeling like an identified patient. I'm the problem. Like the problem is me. And one of the things that I know that you make great effort to make sure kids understand is that intelligence and learning issues or a medical diagnosis have no relationship to intelligence.
Right.
And at the same vein, parents have to kind of evolve to the point of my kid isn't trying to upset me. There's a reason, and sort of coaching parents to go from why are they to I wonder why they are is really, really an important piece because as kids step forward with their independence and autonomy, parents have to step back. And so, but it's this a tenuous relationship because sometimes when parents step back, kids are going to fall. And I actually love it when they do because that's when change happens.
Right.
That's when they understand, oh, I need to do something differently next time.
Right. And so many, good researchers have shown that failure and that difficulty and that falling is necessary for learning.
100%.
It's necessary for learning.
We, on our podcast, we had a researcher, I believe he's at Baylor. He's at a university in Houston. And forgive me, Rishi, because I don't remember. His name is Dr. Rishi Sriram. And he's come on and he did he's actually come on 3 times because we like his content so much. And he talked to us about productive struggle, about how learning happens when where it's hard, but not too hard.
Right.
And where it's active and productive. And so that's something that, I've really sort of incorporated into the language. Like when kids are telling me this feels really hard and I say, oh, we're in the productive struggle zone. That means your brain's going to remember this afterwards.
Exactly. And that's where you help them develop strategies where it's like, this strategy is not working for you. So how can we think about this a different way?
Yeah.
What's another approach to solving this problem? And again, that's where the learning happens. So that's really exciting. I love your framework. And I think it's really helpful for parents in terms of understanding what it is that you do.
Yeah.
But, I've seen kids who come in, like you were saying, who've had tutors. And for many parents, they don't understand the difference between a tutor and an educational therapy. Can you talk a little bit about how the work that you do in a session, maybe what that looks like and how it's different than what a tutor would do?
So an educational therapist is not interested in content. I'm just not. The whole point of an educational therapist is that the content is always new, but it's about teaching kids how to access that curriculum and how to access something that is new and different and what to do when you don't immediately understand. So as an educational therapist, I have, it's a tenuous relationship with tutors because sometimes I'm not interested in a client saying to me, I'm going to do my math homework when my tutor gets there. No, it's about figuring out what problems on the homework. This is the appropriate way to use the tutor. What problems on the homework are confusing you? And then also we want to make sure that they're exploiting the things that are like natural in their worlds too before hiring somebody to come in, meaning, have you asked your teacher? The teachers have risen to the occasion in virtual learning. They are so available to the kids in their classroom and they want the kids to ask them questions. If the teacher doesn't know how you're struggling, they cannot become a better teacher. So we're very different in that we're highly skilled, we're highly trained, we're not, a tutoring relationship can go on all throughout their education because information's always new. Content is always new. But if you're waiting for a tutor to explain it to you, you don't ever get the opportunity to learn it for yourself and teach yourself how to learn the material. So educational therapists act as sort of that bridge of how do I learn the material on my own without, and sometimes look, it's totally appropriate, but to have a tutor, you genuinely not understanding something and you've exhausted all other options. Let's go down that path. But my job is to work myself out of a job. And tutors can just continue on. And the goal of an educational therapist is to build independence and autonomy. And sometimes the end results of tutoring is learned helplessness. That's that student who's waiting for the tutor to get there to do their homework that day.
Right.
I don't like students walking in with, I'm not there to watch them do their homework. If we're working on math, it's appropriate, right? They're to help them access that material. But then if we're working on English, don't come in with your math homework. Right. Like use me appropriately for what our defined goals are for our relationship.
Right. And I think that content piece is so important in terms of the distinction between tutoring and educational therapy. And I think that is so important with respect to writing.
Oh,
because so many kids that I see come in with difficulties with writing, and it's not about the content that they don't know what to write about. So could you speak a little bit about how you help students who struggle with writing? I know you could probably talk about that forever, but I see that often where, parents will say, well, they just don't know what to write about, and they've got the prompt, but the kid stares there at the blank page.
So much I could say about this. We've done a whole series on writing.
Why you're here.
Yeah. So here's what I'll tell you. I've never had a client truly, I don't think, at least in middle school and high school, who hasn't come in and said, I don't like writing. We tell our students that writing is the ultimate executive functioning task. You're holding on to what the teacher is asking of you. You're holding on to the information you know about it. You're holding on to the mechanics of writing. And now we're looking for output too. So there's pressure of like 500 words or 3 to 5 pages, right? One thing that is really and I'll just give a juicy nugget here, is we have to be teaching kids how to reinterpret prompts as questions, particularly in middle school and high school. Oftentimes prompts are long. And oftentimes teachers are asking multiple things simultaneously, and students are overwhelmed because they don't know where to start. So the first thing we do is we immediately put the prompt on the Google Doc, because then you're never looking at the blank page. You need the prompt in front of you. And now let's rework the prompt so they're answerable questions. Then we sort of separate it out. And this is for a long form essay assignment, right?
Right.
But it could also be for short answer. Just sometimes the question is, tell me about. Well, kids really benefit from a question. And that could be as simple as, what do you know about? And then they can answer, because you get the same thing. Parents will report, they can talk for hours about this subject, but they write 3 sentences. So then we have to we have to get all of what they know on the page. And then we have to see, is it an issue about getting the thoughts literally transformed out of your body? Because if they can talk about it, they can write about it. They don't have to write it by hand. This is where the educational therapy piece really plays in. It's there's so many different ways to use technology at this point that can be equally productive and reflective of what they know, because the whole point of writing is to demonstrate what you know. Sometimes I've had students do a video or just record themselves if they're comfortable. Let's just record the conversation. Okay, you've answered the prompt now. Go sentence by sentence. And we'll transcribe it, or do it speech to text into a Google Doc. It's all about getting the thoughts onto the page, and then worrying about the mechanics of writing as the very last step.
Yeah.
Because the population that we work with, they don't use punctuation. They don't take into account capitalization or spelling. That is fine. But it's about teaching them that the last step is going through. And by the way, not going through and saying, go fix all the grammar mistakes, because that's too broad. Go read for capitalization. Go read for punctuation, and take the time to reread. Go read it out loud. Does it sound right to your ear?
Right.
And so it's about breaking down the writing process into a way that is manageable and achievable, and chunking it, because it's not realistic for most people to sit down and boom, this glorious piece. And I think there's an expectation of students, and sometimes they see their peers who are capable of doing it, so they think that's how it quote unquote should be. But I do think we also teach that should happen, and that you should know what your thesis statement is even before you've written anything. And I always throw that out first. I'm like, oh, you don't know how you feel about it yet. Write a little bit.
Right.
The thesis will become very clear to you once you've written about it a little bit. But they get so stuck at that step because sometimes teachers are asking for that first. So then it becomes about, let's have a conversation. Does the teacher really need you to turn in that thesis statement now? Or do they need you to have that final thesis statement in the final assignment? It's very workable as long as you kind of figure out what's the goal that the teacher is asking for. Usually they're like very open to doing it. It depends on the school, but they're very open to doing it in a different way. And it's overwhelming for everybody.
Absolutely. And I think you beautifully laid out kind of where the struggle is within the writing, using writing as an example, and how educational therapy can help students who are struggling with writing.
Yeah.
And And, I'm thinking about all the students who have transitioned to distance learning as a result of this COVID-19 pandemic. And there's so many parents who, we've been talking about this a lot on the podcast, who are seeing their kids struggle for the first time and are looking at these difficulties and maybe seeking out people like you to work with their kids. They've been on Zoom for 3-4 hours and a day, and now they can't perhaps meet you face to face. How are you helping kids remotely with what it is that they're struggling with? And that there's so many struggles right now, particularly with students who've never had struggles before.
It's fascinating to sort of watch. The kids who are coming in now have compensated very, very well. They have looked to their peers in the classroom. Oh, they're pulling this out, so I better do that too, because they missed the direction. They are not turning in homework because a teacher's not standing in front of the room saying, hey, turn this in. A lot of times kids come to the practice and they've done the assignment, but they don't have a system and they don't have a plan for where the assignment lives. And so the assignment doesn't get turned in. So it's an interesting sort of new crop of parents who are sort of coming through, and they really don't know how to navigate and help their kids. And I would also add that parents are seeing a lot of things that we as educational therapists have seen for a long time. And they're just now coming to the realizations. We've been there for a while. For example, online portals are hard.
Yes.
We did a whole episode about online portal pitfalls. Online portals have been a problem for a while. It's not a result of COVID. It's not a result of virtual learning. It's a result of it. There's no perfect system. So sort of addressing the pitfalls and knowing that your online portal cannot be a reliable source of information. And parents need to understand that not every teacher is updating everything every week. Not every teacher is putting everything in the exact same place. Not every teacher is having homework due right before class. So some teachers will have homework due on Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So now parents are seeing how much kids are actually managing and how there can be 150 clicks just for information gathering for learners. So when clients are coming in now, we are placing a huge emphasis in that building phase of educational therapy to build out their systems. They must have a calendar that is separate of their portal, because their portal does not take into account their personal life and their personal responsibilities. They also have to have all their Zoom links in their calendar. They should not be taking 3 clicks to find their Zoom links. Their calendar should be their entry point into their day and their exit point from the day. So the last thing I do at night is, what time do I have to wake up tomorrow? Because what is happening when? I never know. I never know what's next. But that's how adults function, right? And meanwhile, students are storing all that information of where they have to go in their brains. And your brain, Steph will always say, your brain it's like a computer. It only has so much RAM. So if you're spending all your RAM and all your memory focusing on where you have to show up, you have nothing left to give in terms of your performance or preparing for a test. Your brain is maxed out. So the first thing we sort of do is have a strong system for managing their time, a strong system for managing their things. We make rules. There is no turning in homework on Sundays. You turn it in the previous class meeting. So if you have something due on Sunday, well, in your brain, it's got to be done. If you meet in that class at 8 a.m., then it's got to be done before you walk into that class. Act as if you're seeing that teacher in person. And so we start by sort of laying this foundational work. Then we go through and we address what's missing. And we make reasonable determinations about which assignments students are going to catch up on and which assignments we're going to let go of if students are missing a lot of work. Not every assignment is created equally. And also, there's no such thing as an academic emergency. So we don't have to react to things like that. It's schoolwork. I promise everybody's kid. Well, back in the day, I used to teach preschool and I was teaching pre-K, and I used to tell the parents, I promise you, they will be able to read and sign their own marriage contract, their marriage license, and they will walk down the aisle not wearing diapers. Nobody wears diapers walking down the aisle, right? And so we have to keep some perspective that when a 2-point assignment didn't make it in, well, we're not going to lose our minds over that one because we got bigger fish to fry. And helping kids to understand the portal pitfalls is really, really critical. Teachers don't put all the information in the same place. And so we have to sort of work within, and I understand it too, Karen, because they're not seeing, and therapists have a unique perspective in that we are in every school's portal. Like I work with clients from all the schools. So I see the good ones and I see the not so good ones. And when there is direction from administration of this is how we're using the portal, this is like kind of controlling, this is where information is going to be, students are more successful than leaving it up to the individual whims of the teacher. Teachers are setting it up in a way that makes sense to them, but they don't have the virtual experience of seeing 7 or 8 classes that are all entirely different looking.
Right. And it just seems like the systems are critical to student success, that it's absolutely necessary to have that in place, especially now when so many students are trying to navigate so many different things and they don't have the built-in structure of school. And so they have to organize that asynchronous learning time themselves. And that's where kind of the systems that you're talking about are so important. And I feel like, the work that you do is beneficial and critical to students who have these neurodevelopmental challenges, these learning differences that impact their academics and their daily functioning. But also there's strategies that are so helpful to students who may not have a diagnosable learning difficulty, but are struggling and need some strategies that they can utilize to help them be more successful in their academic environment.
I couldn't agree more. We live in LA and I've never had a client call, no matter the age, where the parent has not expressed that their kid is anxious about their learning.
Yeah.
And if they are 3rd grade and up, this is why we start with their systems. Because if they don't know where they're supposed to be and they don't know what they're supposed to have once they get there, that creates anxiety. And I always say you want children to have control over their learning and not have their learning control them. Well, the same with their time. You want to be in control of your time and making determinations about how your time is going to be spent, not having that, your parent run in the room and say, you're late to this class. I just got a call from your teacher. Nobody likes that. And so the systems are critical. And the clients who were sort of with us before COVID, I will say had a very smooth transition into virtual learning because those systems were something that we valued prior to quarantine and virtual learning. And the ones who have come in since, that dissipates anxiety immediately. And they don't always understand why it's important. So kind of working through that and explaining to them why do I need it? It says so on my portal. Well, you think it says so on your portal, right? But it's not, right? And you kind of start talking them through all of it. They're like, oh, okay. And then we do a 2-week trial because they're resistant to it. And then by the end of 2 weeks, they've adopted it and they understand and they feel better.
Absolutely. And I feel like the strategies and the skills that you're helping students develop are not only going to be important now at this point in time where they're struggling, but these are lifelong skills that will benefit them when they're in college, when they've graduated from college and they're organizing their home, when they're managing their finances, 100%. When they're,
Yeah, I've had students who've graduated on and have gone to college, and I'll get a text and they'll say, this is where this lives in my apartment. And I'm like, yes, one place where it could possibly be. And I was not my mother will tell you, I'm still this way to a certain extent of like, I'm totally fine with a pile of clothes. But at a certain point, I got tired of losing my keys. And I realized I needed a rule about where they live. And I don't lose my keys anymore. And so a lot of helping them sort of formulate what their own rules are. And I often will tell kids, because sometimes these executive functioning struggles and managing time and managing things are systemic in the family. And I will tell kids, this is what's going to happen. Your older sibling, let's imagine that they're extremely high functioning. They're going to walk by and they're going to see your calendar and they're going to go, what's that? And your older sibling, who you've always looked up to and you've always felt like you couldn't quite meet them because they're so high functioning and you've always sort of struggled, you're going to sit down and you're going to teach them how to organize their life. And you're going to become the executive functioning coach you're going to have the strongest executive functioning out of everybody in your family. And as a result, they teach their parents, they get family calendars going. It can be transformative.
Absolutely. And for that child, empowering. It's just life-changing.
Yes.
So this has been so fantastic. I'm glad you brought up executive functioning because we are going to be talking about that in the next episode.
Great.
But thank you for getting us ready.
I didn't define it, so you'll define it next week.
We will do that next episode. But this has been so beneficial and fantastic and informative. And I know that parents are going to want to reach out to you, or listeners are going to want to reach out to you for more information. What is the best way that they can connect with you?
So the best way to connect with me is by going to my website, which is www.kappedtherapy.com. That's K as in kite, A as in apple, P as in Peter, P as in Paul, edtherapy.com, and sign up for a phone call. That's the fastest way to connect with me. They can also email me too at rachel@kappedtherapy.com, but I'll probably say sign up for a phone call. Phone calls are better.
Wonderful. And I will also put a link to your fantastic podcast in the show notes as well so that people can listen in.
Fantastic.
Because you're just sharing such important information there. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen. A lot of what we've talked about, there's full episodes on the stuff that we're talking about. So
we will definitely send them there. So thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you for having me.
Wonderful chatting with you. It's always great. I'm continuing to learn so much about the work that you do. And I love that we had this chance to talk.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm so excited for you for the podcast. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.